Ethan stood in the quiet control room, staring out of the large window at the distant planet below. His mind was far from calm, but he had learned to hide his emotions well. He had to. His mission, like every mission before it, depended on it. He was a soldier, trained to stay composed under the harshest circumstances, and today was no different. The war between humanity and the alien Confederacy had reached a critical point. The Confederacy, a group of several species that had once been enemies, had now formed an alliance with Earth. In this war, alliances were formed in the most unusual ways. The species that had once been humanity's fiercest foes were now our allies, and among them was Liara, an alien woman who was one of the most trusted members of the Confederacy's high command. Liara was a member of a telepathic race, known for their extraordinary mental abilities. She was assigned to the mission as a liaison between the human forces and the alien allies. Her species could hear thoughts, communicate through their minds, and share experiences in ways that humans could never imagine. Her presence was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, her telepathic abilities allowed her to understand human strategies and intentions more deeply than anyone could, which made her an invaluable asset. On the other hand, it made her an anomaly among the human soldiers. She was a reminder that humans were just one small part of the vast universe, a part that was still figuring out how to survive. Ethan had met Liara only once before, during a diplomatic meeting in the heart of a war-ravaged city. She was a striking figure, her tall frame radiating confidence, her sharp, angular features giving her an almost otherworldly appearance. But it wasn't her looks that had intrigued Ethan, it was her ability to read minds. He had heard the stories. Liara could hear thoughts. Every human she came in contact with. And yet, when Ethan was in her presence, she had never once acknowledged his thoughts. His mind remained silent to her, a void, a mystery. She had tried to reach out to him, to probe his mind as she did with others, but for reasons unknown to her, Ethan's thoughts remained unreadable. Liara's telepathy was a natural gift for her people, but it had always been limited. She could communicate with her own species and other telepathic beings easily, but humans were a different matter. Their minds, so vastly different from hers, were like closed books to her. She could only sense surface-level emotions and intentions in them, fear, joy, sadness, confusion, but she could never truly dive into their minds and understand them the way she could with her own people. And then there was Ethan. She had noticed him during their first meeting, standing apart from the others, his face unreadable. When she had tried to reach into his thoughts, she felt nothing. It was as if there was a barrier around his mind, a shield that protected him from her abilities. It intrigued her, and curiosity bloomed in her chest. Why couldn't she hear his thoughts? Was he different from the others? Was there something about him that made him immune to her powers? That thought lingered as Liara made her way to the briefing room where Ethan was waiting. She had been ordered to accompany him on a mission, and she knew this would be her chance to get closer to him, to figure out what made his mind so impenetrable. When she entered the room, Ethan looked up at her, his expression calm as always. He wasn't surprised by her presence. He knew why she was here. They had been paired up for the mission, and he had been briefed on the importance of this alliance with the Confederacy. It was clear that the war had changed everything, and humans needed all the help they could get. But despite the tension in the air, there was an unspoken understanding between them. They both knew that they were bound by duty, by the need to get this mission completed, and perhaps even by something more, something they didn't yet understand. "Ready for the mission?" Ethan asked, his voice steady. Liara nodded, though her mind was elsewhere. She could feel the presence of his thoughts like a wall, a thick, unyielding wall that prevented her from accessing his mind. It was like trying to communicate through a fog. She could sense his emotions, his underlying tension, but beyond that, nothing. "You don't say much, do you?" she asked casually, though her words were layered with more curiosity than she let on. Ethan's lips curled into a small smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I say only what's necessary." Liara tilted her head slightly, her gaze narrowing as she studied him. There was something about him, something different. She had never encountered anyone like him. She had been in contact with thousands of humans during the war, yet Ethan was the only one whose thoughts she could not read. And this intrigued her more than anything. "I don't suppose you could explain why your mind is so quiet, could you?" Liara asked, her voice taking on a softer tone. She was no longer asking as a soldier, but as someone who wanted to understand. Ethan met her gaze without hesitation, his expression unreadable. "If I could explain it, I would," he replied simply. "But some things are better left unsaid." Liara was taken aback by his response. It wasn't the answer she expected, and it only made her more determined to uncover the truth. As they walked through the station's corridors toward the shuttle bay, Liara tried again. She extended her mental presence toward him, hoping to catch a glimpse of his thoughts. She reached out, just a subtle probe into his mind, but once again there was nothing. Frustration bubbled up inside her. How was this possible? Why couldn't she hear him? What was it about him that prevented her from accessing his thoughts? Ethan could feel her trying, and though he didn't acknowledge it, he couldn't help but feel a slight twinge of discomfort. He had always been good at blocking out distractions, but this felt different. Liara was no ordinary distraction. Her presence, her telepathy, were a constant, subtle hum in the back of his mind, like an itch he couldn't scratch. It was both unnerving and fascinating. The shuttle ride was brief, but in that short time, Liara's curiosity grew. She knew she had to get answers. But how? What was it about this human that made him so impervious to her powers? Was it something unique to him, or was it something about humanity as a whole? By the time they reached their destination, Liara had made up her mind. She would find the answer, no matter what it took. As they disembarked, ready to face the challenges of the mission ahead, Liara's thoughts were consumed with one question. Why couldn't she hear Ethan's thoughts? And what did it mean for both of them? The mission had been more difficult than anticipated. The shuttle had landed on an unfamiliar moon, covered in thick, swirling mist. The atmosphere was heavy with tension as Ethan and Liara prepared to set up the base camp. Despite the cold, there was a warmth between them, though it was unspoken and undefined. Liara couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that there was more to Ethan than she had first realized. Ethan, as always, remained calm and collected. He had a job to do, and he would do it with the same precision he applied to everything. He was used to the unpredictable nature of war, but something about this situation felt different. It wasn't the mission itself, it was Liara. She was an anomaly, a puzzle he couldn't solve, and it bothered him more than he was willing to admit. He had always been able to handle anything life threw his way, but Liara's constant attempts to read his mind created a ripple of unease in him. He couldn't help but wonder what she would discover if she ever succeeded. What would she think of him then? As the night set in, the two of them worked together in silence. Liara tried again, her focus narrowing on Ethan. She had been subtle at first, but now she was growing desperate. Her telepathic powers were supposed to be infallible, yet here she was, struggling with a human soldier who seemed impervious to her abilities. She had been trained to read minds since she was a child. The telepathic connection was natural to her, like breathing. But Ethan was different. She needed to understand why. Without warning, Liara reached out once more. She let her mental presence wash over Ethan, a subtle probe that had worked on every other human she had encountered. But as always, there was nothing. His mind was silent, blocked off from her like a fortress with no way in. Her frustration grew, and for the first time she allowed herself to focus more intently. This was not just curiosity anymore. This was personal. Ethan felt her reaching for him again. This time, he didn't try to block it. He didn't need to. It was almost as if his mind had learned to shut itself off from the outside world, to create a barrier that even Liara's sharpest powers couldn't breach. He turned to face her, his eyes cold and unreadable, but his voice betrayed a hint of weariness. "You won't find anything. You're wasting your time." Liara didn't say anything for a long moment. She couldn't believe it. She had always prided herself on her abilities, on her mental connection to those around her. Yet this man, this soldier, was an enigma. Why couldn't she hear him? Her gaze softened slightly. "Why?" she finally asked, her voice quieter than before. "Why can't I hear your thoughts?" Ethan sighed, a long, drawn-out exhale that seemed to carry the weight of years. "I'm not like other humans, Liara. I've been trained to block it out." Liara's brows furrowed. "Trained? Block it out? How?" Ethan looked away, his gaze drifting to the distant stars above them. "It's classified, top secret, but I'll tell you this. I was part of a program designed to protect humans from mind manipulation, from telepaths." Liara blinked, her mind racing. "You're telling me that there's a way to shield yourself from telepathy?" Ethan nodded, though it wasn't a gesture of pride. It was more of a resigned acceptance. "It's not perfect, it's not foolproof, but it's enough. Enough to keep me from being vulnerable." The silence between them was heavy. Liara could sense the weight of his words, but there was still so much she didn't understand. How could humans create such a powerful defense? And why had they felt the need to do so in the first place? "But why didn't you tell me this before?" Liara asked, a note of accusation creeping into her voice. "Why keep it a secret?" Ethan's eyes met hers, his expression hardening. "Because it's not something I'm proud of, and because it's dangerous. If the wrong people knew about this, it could be used against us, against everyone." Liara took a step back, her thoughts swirling. She had never encountered anything like this before. Not only had humanity created a shield against telepathy, but they had also gone so far as to keep it hidden. It made her question everything she knew about humans. How far were they willing to go to protect themselves? The night wore on as they worked in silence, setting up the camp and preparing for the rest of their mission. Liara couldn't stop thinking about what Ethan had told her. There was something about this soldier, something hidden beneath the surface that she couldn't quite understand. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a man who had been trained to resist her kind, to block her out completely. And for reasons unknown, that made him even more intriguing. As the campfire crackled and the moonlight bathed the planet in an eerie glow, Liara sat in quiet contemplation. She knew that the rest of the mission would be difficult, but now she couldn't help but feel that the true challenge had just begun. It wasn't just about the war anymore. It was about Ethan and the mystery that surrounded him. The next day, the situation became even more complicated. The enemy forces had arrived on the planet, and the battle for control was about to begin. The two allies, human and alien, needed to work together or they would fail. And yet, Liara found herself distracted. The thoughts of Ethan lingered in her mind, clouding her focus. The telepathic barrier he had erected around himself had become an obsession, and the more she thought about it, the more she realized that it was something she couldn't ignore. As they prepared for battle, Liara knew she had to keep her focus on the mission. She had a job to do, just like Ethan. But as the sound of distant explosions reached their ears, she couldn't help but wonder if there was more to this soldier than met the eye. And more importantly, what would happen if she ever succeeded in breaking through his mental shield? Ethan, on the other hand, was more than aware of the danger Liara posed. He knew that she would keep pushing, keep probing, until she found a way inside his mind. And he couldn't allow that. He had worked too hard, too long to keep his thoughts private. There were things in his mind, things from his past, that no one, not even Liara, could see. But as they moved toward the battlefield, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to face a new kind of enemy, one that wasn't from another species. This time, the enemy was Liara's curiosity, and it was something he couldn't defend against. The two of them stood together, ready to face whatever challenges awaited them. But deep down, neither of them knew just how much their partnership would change in the coming days. Liara could sense Ethan's unease, but she couldn't understand it. She didn't know if she could ever fully understand him. But one thing was certain: this mission and their relationship was far from over, and the secrets between them would only grow more complicated as they moved forward. The day was breaking, and the battle had begun. Ethan stood at the front lines of the makeshift defense, his weapon ready but his thoughts elsewhere. The tension of the mission was no longer just in the air, it was deep inside him, like a weight pressing down on his chest. The mission, the war, and even Liara, everything felt like it was spiraling out of control, and he couldn't do anything about it. Liara stood beside him, her presence calm and steady, though her thoughts were far from peaceful. She could feel the rush of adrenaline building inside her, the same feeling she had known in countless battles. But this time was different. This time, her mind was preoccupied with one thing above all else: Ethan, the soldier who had remained an enigma for far too long. Her telepathy, usually so sharp and precise, was useless against him. Despite her best efforts, Ethan's mind remained an impenetrable fortress. She had tried everything: subtle probing, gentle nudges, even deep dives into his emotional state, but nothing had worked. His thoughts were silent, and his mind was closed off to her in a way that no other human had been. Liara's curiosity had only deepened with every passing hour. What was Ethan hiding? What was it about him that made him immune to her telepathic powers? More importantly, why had he kept the truth about his neural inhibitor a secret? As they moved forward in their positions, Ethan kept his focus on the battlefield. The alien forces were closing in, their movements swift and efficient. He could hear the sound of their weapons charging, the hum of energy shields powering up, and the distant explosions as their forces collided. But through all of it, his thoughts remained locked away. There was a storm brewing inside him, but no one could hear it, not even Liara. For a moment he glanced over at her. Her eyes were scanning the horizon, calculating the next move, and her expression was one of calm determination. She was a warrior in every sense of the word, and yet she was still obsessed with him. She wanted to know what made him tick. She wanted to break through the barrier around his mind. He had to stop her from doing that. He couldn't afford to let her in, not now, not when the stakes were so high. As the battle raged on, Ethan and Liara worked together, but there was a growing distance between them. The unspoken tension between them was palpable, and neither one knew how to bridge the gap. Liara could feel it, but she didn't know how to address it. She couldn't stop thinking about what Ethan had said the night before, that he had been part of a secret program designed to protect humans from telepathic manipulation. She didn't understand how something like that could exist, let alone why Ethan had been involved. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that there were things in his past, things that could change everything. The battle grew fiercer as the day wore on. Liara moved with grace, using her telepathic abilities to coordinate the defense with the other soldiers. She could feel their thoughts, their emotions, and she guided them with ease. But Ethan remained a mystery to her. He was focused, calculating, and as always, his thoughts remained silent. Liara had heard stories of humans who were resistant to telepathic influence, but she had never encountered anyone like Ethan. There was something unique about him, something that set him apart from everyone else. And as the battle escalated, Liara began to wonder if she would ever uncover the truth. As the hours passed, the fighting intensified. Liara could feel the weight of the war bearing down on her. She had seen death before, had felt the pain of loss countless times, but this war was different. The stakes were higher. Humanity's future was on the line, and she was caught in the middle of it all. Ethan, too, was feeling the pressure. Every decision weighed on him like 1,000 tons, but he knew what had to be done. He had been trained for this. He had been trained to think fast, to react without hesitation, and to protect the people around him, no matter the cost. But there was something else. Something deeper. As he fought alongside Liara, as he watched her move with precision and grace, he realized that he couldn't keep her at a distance forever. She was a part of this mission. She was a part of his team. And no matter how hard he tried to block her out, she was always there, standing by his side, always trying to understand him. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt a strange sense of warmth. It was subtle, but it was there. Liara's presence had become a source of comfort in the chaos of battle. He couldn't explain why, but in that moment he felt like maybe, just maybe, they could work together. Liara, too, began to feel a shift. The wall she had built around Ethan's mind, the mystery that had consumed her, was starting to fade. It wasn't that he was letting her in. It was that she was beginning to understand him in a way that wasn't defined by her telepathic abilities. She could feel his determination, his fear, his hope, not through his thoughts but through his actions. She could see it in the way he moved, in the way he fought. He was human, and that made him both vulnerable and strong in ways that telepathy could never explain. And then, in the middle of the battle, something changed. The enemy forces were closing in on their position. The situation was becoming increasingly dire. Ethan was in the midst of leading the defense when an explosion rocked the ground beneath him. His body was thrown to the side, and for a moment everything went black. Liara was at his side in an instant, her hands glowing with healing energy as she checked his vitals. She could feel the pulse of his thoughts now, the flicker of consciousness as he fought to stay awake. Ethan's eyes fluttered open, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he looked directly into Liara's eyes. "You're still here," he whispered, his voice weak but steady. Liara didn't respond immediately. She was focused on his recovery, but there was something else in her gaze, a shift. It wasn't just concern for him, it was something deeper. She had been wrong about him, wrong about the wall he had built around his mind. "I'm always here," she finally said, her voice steady, though there was a tremor in it that she couldn't hide. And then something unexpected happened. Liara, without thinking, allowed herself to reach out, just a tiny brush of her telepathic abilities. She was careful, delicate, almost afraid of what she might find. But as soon as her mind made contact with his, she felt a rush of emotions. Not just his pain, but his memories, the things he had been hiding, the things he had locked away for so long. For the briefest moment, Liara understood him completely. She saw his fears, his regrets, his deepest hopes. She saw the way he had been shaped by the war, by the program that had isolated him from others, and she saw the loneliness that had come with it. And in that moment, she realized that his mind hadn't been closed off to her because of some defense mechanism. It had been closed off because that was the only way he knew how to survive. He had learned to shut the world out, to protect himself from being vulnerable. And she had been trying to break through that barrier, not realizing that what she was doing was forcing him to relive the pain of his past. She pulled back, her heart heavy with the weight of what she had just learned. Ethan was not just a soldier. He was a person with a past, with memories, and with a future that he had to fight for every day. Ethan looked at her, his expression softened. "You were trying to understand me," he said quietly, almost as if he were reading her thoughts. Liara nodded, but she couldn't find the words. There was no need for them. She understood now. She understood everything. The battle raged on around them, but for that moment, it felt like time had stopped. They were no longer just two soldiers fighting for survival. They were two individuals who had seen each other, truly seen each other, for the first time. Ethan reached out, his hand brushing hers. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. They were in this together, for better or worse. No barriers, no walls, just two people trying to make sense of the chaos around them. And in that moment, Liara realized that maybe, just maybe, telepathy wasn't the answer after all. Maybe the truth could only be found in the silence between them, in the actions they took and the choices they made. Together, they would face whatever came next. Together, they would fight for a future that neither of them could see, but one that they would build step by step. As the battle continued, Liara and Ethan stood side by side, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. They didn't need to read each other's minds. They had already begun to understand each other in ways that went far beyond telepathy. And that was enough.